It was an ordinary morning, the kind of morning that didn't seem special at all. The sun had just risen above the rooftops of Malik's neighborhood, painting the sky with soft shades of gold and pink. Birds were chirping, neighbors were waking up, and life moved with the same rhythm as every other day. For Malik, a 12-year-old boy with bright eyes and a curious spirit, it felt like just another start to a normal school day. He had no idea that before the sun would set, his life, and the life of his family, would change forever. Malik lived in a small, humble home with his parents and younger sister. His father worked long hours at a factory, while his mother stayed home to take care of the house and the children. They didn't have much, but they had love, and that was enough to keep the family strong even when times were hard. Malik often dreamed of big adventures, the kind he read about in books or saw in movies, but his days usually looked very simple. Going to school, playing with friends, helping his mother, and sometimes sitting on the porch to watch the cars go by. That morning, Malik woke up to the familiar sound of his mother calling his name. "Malik, get ready. You'll be late for school." She shouted from the kitchen, where the smell of warm bread filled the air. He yawned, rubbed his eyes, and dragged himself out of bed. As he put on his slightly worn school uniform, he thought about the math test waiting for him later in the day. That was his biggest concern. To him, the day didn't seem like it held any surprises. Just the same routine he had lived countless times before. At the breakfast table, his younger sister teased him about always being the last one ready. Malik laughed it off, stuffing a piece of bread into his mouth while his mother reminded him to be careful on the way to school. His father had already left for work, as he usually did before sunrise, so Malik didn't see him that morning. After finishing his food, he slung his backpack over his shoulder, kissed his mother on the cheek, and ran out the door. The cool morning breeze touched his face as he started walking down the familiar street toward school. Everything looked normal. Children were playing on the sidewalk. A neighbor waved at him from across the street, and a bus rolled past, filled with workers. Heading into the city, Malik walked at a steady pace, humming a tune to himself. Sometimes he wondered if anything exciting would ever happen in his life, or if his days would always look this simple. He couldn't have known that fate had already written a story for him, a story that would make him a hero before the day was over. As he turned the corner near the park, Malik noticed the same police car he often saw parked nearby. The neighborhood wasn't always safe, and the police would drive through often to keep things under control. To Malik, it wasn't unusual to see officers around, so he didn't pay much attention at first. His mind was busy with thoughts about his math test and the promise he made to his teacher that he would try harder this time. The air was fresh. The sky was clear, and everything felt calm. It was the kind of calm that hides the storm waiting to come. Malik walked a little faster, his shoes tapping against the pavement, not knowing that just a few steps ahead, something would happen that would test his courage in a way no math test ever could. He was just a boy, innocent and unaware of the role destiny had chosen for him that day. But destiny has a way of showing up when you least expect it, and it often begins on mornings that look completely ordinary. That day began like any other for Malik: breakfast with family, a walk to school, and simple thoughts about the hours ahead. But behind the curtain of normal life, something extraordinary was about to unfold. Later, and people would ask him about that morning, Malik would always say the same thing. It felt like a regular day. I didn't know anything special was going to happen. And that's the beauty of his story. True courage often begins when you least expect it, in the middle of normal moments that suddenly turn into life-changing ones. For Malik, this was the beginning of a journey that would not only change the life of a police officer and her unborn child, but would also save his own family in ways he could never have imagined. That morning carried no warnings, no signs that something unusual was waiting ahead. But every step Malik took toward school was pulling him closer to the moment that would test his heart, his bravery, and his spirit. He was about to face something far greater than books or classrooms. He was walking into a story that would become unforgettable, not just for him, but for everyone who would hear it in the days to come. Malik's feet tapped against the pavement as he strolled down the familiar road, his backpack bouncing slightly on his shoulders. The morning air still carried a cool freshness, and the sun had risen high enough to brighten the neighborhood. He thought about the math test waiting for him, silently repeating numbers in his head, as if practicing would make the answers magically stay there. It was just another school morning, and everything felt normal. But life has a strange way of turning the ordinary into the extraordinary when you least expect it. As Malik passed the small park near the corner, something unusual caught his attention. The police car that he had noticed earlier was still there, but this time something felt off. The engine was running, the driver's side door slightly open, and no officer in sight. He slowed his steps, his young mind torn between curiosity and caution. Police officers were usually strong, confident, and always on their feet. Why would one leave a car running like that? Then he heard it. A faint sound, almost like a groan, followed by the noise of something falling to the ground. Malik froze. His heart began to beat faster as he turned his head toward the source. Just a few feet away, near the car, lay Officer Daniels, a woman he had seen before patrolling the area. Her hands were clutching her stomach, her face pale with pain. She was pregnant, her rounded belly showing clearly under her uniform. She tried to call out, but her voice was weak, barely louder than a whisper. For a moment, Malik's legs refused to move. He was just a boy, and the sight of a police officer, someone he always thought of as untouchable and strong, lying helpless on the ground, shocked him. He wanted to run, to call for help, but fear held him still. Then he remembered something his father once told him. Son, bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about what you do even when you are scared. Those words pushed him forward. Malik dropped his backpack and ran toward the officer. Ma'am, are you okay? He shouted, kneeling beside her. Officer Daniels opened her eyes halfway, gasping for air. I can't breathe properly. Please, she whispered, her voice trembling. Malik felt his own body shake, but he forced himself to stay calm. The boy quickly pulled out his small phone, a cheap one his parents had saved to buy him, and dialed 911. His voice, though young, carried urgency as he told the operator. What was happening? A police officer. She's on the ground. She's pregnant. Please come fast. He gave them the location as best as he could, sighs never leaving the struggling woman beside him. Minutes felt like hours as Malik tried to figure out what to do next. He remembered the first aid lessons given at school during safety week. Keep the person awake. Talk to them. Don't let them close their eyes. Those words echoed in his mind. He gently placed his hand on Officer Daniels' shoulder. Stay with me, ma'am. Don't close your eyes. Help is coming. Just breathe. Please try. The officer's breathing was shallow, her hand gripping his tightly, as if clinging to the boy's voice for strength. Malik kept talking, his words spilling out in a rush. He told her his name, about his sister who always teased him in the morning, about how his mom made the best bread in the neighborhood. He said anything he could think of to keep her from slipping away into silence. People began to gather, drawn by the scene. Some stood frozen, unsure of what to do, while others pulled out phones to record, as often happens in today's world. But Malik didn't care about them. He only cared about the woman in front of him. He didn't even realize how heroic he looked, a small boy holding the hand of a police officer twice his size, keeping her alive with the strength of his voice and his heart. Finally, the sound of sirens filled the air. The flashing lights of an ambulance and another patrol car broke through the crowd. Paramedics rushed out, pushing Malik gently aside as they checked the officer's pulse and placed an oxygen mask over her face. One of them turned to him, eyes wide with surprise. "You kept her awake. You did good, kid. You may have saved both her and the baby." Malik's chest rose and fell heavily as relief washed over him. His knees trembled, and he sat back on the ground, suddenly realizing how scared he had been the whole time. But beneath the fear was something else, a strange, warm feeling he had never experienced before. Pride. He had done something that mattered. As the ambulance doors closed and Officer Daniels was taken away, Malik picked up his backpack with shaky hands. His day had started like any other, but now, as he walked slowly toward school, he knew he had just lived a moment that would stay with him forever. Little did he know, the story was far from over. The life he had just saved would soon return the favor in ways he could never have imagined. Malik stood frozen for a few seconds after the ambulance drove away, the flashing red and blue lights disappearing into the distance. His heart was still pounding, his palms sweaty from the fear that had held him just moments before. He had only been a boy on his way to school, but in a blink, he had become the center of something much bigger than himself. The crowd that had gathered slowly began to scatter, whispering about what they had just seen. But Malik remained still, his backpack hanging loosely from one shoulder, his young mind trying to understand what had just happened. What struck him most was not that he had called for help. Many people could have done that. It was that, in those tense moments, he had not run away. He had stayed. He had faced the fear in front of him and chosen to act, even though every part of him had wanted to flee. That was the moment his courage was born, though Malik did not realize it as he finally continued walking toward school. Memories of what he had just done played again and again in his mind. The look in the officer's eyes when she had grabbed his hand. The weight of her trust, as if her life and her baby's life depended only on him. And the sound of the paramedic saying, "You may have saved them." That sentence kept echoing inside his head like a drumbeat. By the time Malik reached the school gates, his classmates were already in their classrooms. He slipped quietly into his seat, hoping not to attract attention, but the storm in his heart wouldn't calm down. He couldn't focus on the math problems written on the board. His pencil shook in his hand as he tried to solve them. Numbers blurring before his eyes. He thought of Officer Daniels lying helpless, the fear in her voice, and how close she might have been to losing everything if he hadn't been there. During lunch break, few kids who had seen the scene at the park came rushing toward him. "Hey Malik, was that you who helped the cop this morning?" one of them asked, eyes wide with curiosity. Another added, "People are saying you were holding her hand and keeping her awake. Is it true?" Malik felt heat rise in his cheeks. He wasn't used to attention. Normally, he was just the quiet boy in the corner. Now, all of a sudden, he was being looked at like someone important. He shrugged, trying to play it down. "I just called for help," he muttered. But deep inside, he knew it was more than that. Hadn't just called. He had faced something most grown-ups would hesitate to face. That evening, when he got home, his mother noticed something different in him. He wasn't his usual playful self. He sat quietly at the table, staring at his hands as though they held some secret. His little sister teased him again, but he didn't even respond this time. His mother finally asked, "Malik, what happened today?" At first, he didn't want to tell her, afraid she might worry. But slowly, the story poured out. The police car, the officer, the way she looked at him and how he kept talking to her so she wouldn't close her eyes. His mother listened carefully, her own eyes filling with tears. When he finished, she reached across the table and held his hands tightly. "Do you know what you did today, Malik?" she said softly. "You were brave. You didn't run away. You faced fear and helped someone when they needed it most. That is courage." Her words settled deep in his heart. Courage, he rolled the word over in his mind, as if testing its weight. He had always thought heroes were people in uniforms, or, on television, strong adults with power and training. But now he realized something. Courage could live even in the smallest of hearts, even in a boy like him. That night, Malik lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. His father had come home late, and when he heard the story, he had placed a firm hand on Malik's shoulder, his voice proud but firm. "Son, never forget this. You didn't just save a woman today. You've proved that even in fear, you can stand tall." That is something many men fail to do. Malik thought about those words long into the night. For the first time, he felt different, stronger somehow, though nothing about his small body had changed. What had changed was inside him. He had discovered a part of himself he didn't know existed, the part that could act when it mattered most. The next morning, when Malik walked to school again, the neighborhood seemed different. A few neighbors waved at him warmly. Some, even, clapped him on the back, saying things like, "Good job, young man, and you're a hero." Malik smiled shyly, though he didn't feel like a hero. He had only done what his heart told him to do. But courage has a way of shining brightly, even when you try to hide it. Malik didn't know that the story of his bravery was already spreading far beyond the neighborhood. And soon it would bring changes to his life and his family that he never could have expected. For now, though Malik walked with a quiet pride in his step, he was still just a boy. But now, he was a boy who had faced fear and chosen courage. And that choice had set into motion a chain of events that would transform his world forever. The ambulance sirens had faded into the distance, but for Malik, the memory of the scene replayed endlessly in his mind. He could still see Officer Daniel's pale face, the way her hand trembled as she held onto his, and the heavy weight of her breaths. Every second felt etched into him, as if life itself had slowed down so he would never forget it. At school, the world seemed to move normally again. Teachers explained lessons. Children laughed in the corridors, and chalk scratched against the blackboard, yet Malik's heart carried something heavier, something different. He had been at the center of a moment where life and death balanced on the edge. And somehow, his small actions had tipped the scale toward life. He didn't yet realize the depth of what had happened, but whispers of it followed him everywhere. Later that evening, while Malik was helping his mother wash dishes, the television played softly in the background. The evening news anchor's calm voice caught his attention. A local police officer and her unborn child are safe tonight after collapsing near her patrol car this morning. Quick action by a young boy may have saved both lives. Authorities say the officer is now recovering in the hospital. The plate slipped from Malik's hand into the soapy water. His eyes widened. His story was on the news. His mother turned and looked at him in shock. "That's you, Malik. That's you," she whispered, clutching his shoulder. His little sister squealed, running through the house yelling, "My brother's a hero. My brother's a hero." Malik sat frozen, hearing it told by someone else. A stranger on TV made it feel surreal. He hadn't thought about cameras or stories or the world watching. He had only thought about saving someone who needed him. Yet now, the world was beginning to see what he had done. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Officer Daniels lay resting in her bed, her unborn baby safe inside her. Doctors told her that if Malik hadn't kept her awake and calm until help arrived, both she and her child might not have survived. She closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer of thanks, not only to God, but also to the boy whose voice she could still hear echoing in her memory. "Stay with me. Don't close your eyes. Help is coming." 2 days later, Malik's life shifted again. His mother received a phone call from the police department. They wanted Malik and his family to come to the station. Nervous but curious, Malik put on his neatest shirt, one that was a little too big for him. and went with his parents and sister. When they arrived, dozens of officers greeted them warmly. Cameras flashed, reporters held out microphones, and Malik's cheeks turned red from all the attention. But in the middle of the room, standing with a gentle smile, was Officer Daniels. She looked healthier now, though still pale, and her hand rested protectively on her stomach as Malik walked toward her. She opened her arms and pulled him into a hug. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "You saved us both. I will never forget what you did." Tears glistened in her eyes, and for a moment, Malik felt the world stop. He hadn't just been brave, he had given a mother and her child a second chance at life. The chief of police stepped forward, holding a certificate and a shiny medal. "Today, we honor a young man whose courage went beyond his years." Malik didn't think of himself. He thought of saving a life. And because of that, Officer Daniels and her baby are safe. Applause filled the room as the medal was placed around Malik's neck. His parents stood proudly, tears in their eyes, as they watched their son be recognized, not just as their child, but as a hero to the entire community. Malik looked down at the medal, feeling its weight against his chest. He thought of his father's words, "Bravery is what you do even when you are scared." Now he understood them more than ever. The news spread even wider after that ceremony. Articles were written, videos were shared online, and people across the city began talking about the boy who saved a pregnant police officer. Some called it a miracle, others called it fate. For Malik, it was something simpler. He had just done what his heart told him to do. That night, when the family returned home, Malik lay in bed with the medal resting beside him. He stared at it in the dim light, but what shone brighter in his mind was not the medal itself. It was the memory of Officer Daniels holding his hand, trusting him, and then hugging him with tears in her eyes. That was the true reward, knowing that because he stayed, because he acted, lives continued to breathe. And yet, life has a way of weaving unexpected turns. Malik believed his story with Officer Daniels ended there, but fate had more chapters waiting. What he didn't know was that the woman he had saved would soon play a role in saving him and his family when they faced their darkest moment. The days after the ceremony felt different for Malik. His life, once so ordinary, had now been touched by something extraordinary. Neighbors who once passed him with only a nod now stopped to shake his hand, their smiles warmer, their voices filled with pride. Strangers from across the city sent letters addressed simply to the brave boy. Some even dropped by his house with gifts, books, clothes, sometimes even food, all wanting to show appreciation. For Malik, it was overwhelming. He had never asked for recognition. All he had wanted that morning was to reach school on time. But now, his act of courage had blossomed into something much bigger. One afternoon, as he sat on the porch watching children ride their bikes, a police car pulled up in front of his house. Out stepped Officer Daniels, moving more carefully now, one hand resting protectively on her stomach. She carried a small basket of fruit and flowers. And in her eyes was a deep gratitude that words alone could never capture. "Malik," she said softly, kneeling a little so her gaze met his, "I don't even know how to begin thanking you. Every day I wake up and feel my baby kick. I remember you. Because of you, my child will have a chance to live. Because of you, I will get to be a mother." Malik shifted uncomfortably, unused to such heavy words. I just did what anyone would have done," he said quietly. But Officer Daniels shook her head firmly. No, not everyone would have stopped. Not everyone would have stayed. Many people walked by that morning. But you, a boy, chose to stay when it mattered most. That is rare. That is precious. Her words sank into his heart. For the first time, Malik realized just how much his actions had meant not only to her, but to the life inside her. A child who would one day hear the story. of a young boy who had been their first protector. From that day onward, Officer Daniels made it a point to visit Malik's family often. She would bring small gifts, sometimes a homemade meal, sometimes baby clothes, but more than anything, she brought kindness. She sat with Malik's mother, sharing stories about her own fears of motherhood and how grateful she was to have been given a second chance. She laughed with Malik's little sister, who loved to touch her belly, and whispered to the baby. Slowly, a bond began to grow, not of duty or formality, but of family-like love. The police department, too, never forgot what Malik had done. On weekends, officers would invite him to the station, letting him sit inside patrol cars or watch training drills. They treated him like one of their own, nicknaming him Little Guardian. Malik felt shy about the attention, but deep inside, he cherished the sense of belonging it gave him. But what touched Malik most was not the medal, not the visits, and not the newspaper headlines. It was the way Officer Daniels looked at him. Every time she saw him, with eyes filled with gratitude beyond words, she would often repeat the same phrase, "You saved me, Malik. You saved us." And though he never quite knew how to respond, those words made him stand taller, walk prouder, and believe in the strength of his own heart. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Malik sat outside with his father. The man, usually quiet and tired from long shifts at the factory, placed an arm around his son's shoulder. "You've done something most men never get the chance to do," he said. "You gave life back to someone. That is the highest gift anyone can give. Never forget, son, that is a blessing." Malik looked at his father, feeling a warmth spread through him. Until then, he had thought courage was about big actions, about being strong, loud, and fearless. But now he understood it was something quieter, deeper. Courage was about listening to your heart in the moment when it mattered. Most as weeks passed, gratitude continued to follow him. Letters poured in from people he had never met. Some were from mothers who wrote, "Thank you for reminding us there are still heroes in the world." Others were from children, saying they wanted to be brave like him. Malik read every word, his young mind slowly realizing that his single act had rippled across lives in ways he could never have imagined. But even as all this unfolded, Malik remained humble. He still woke up early, still helped his mother with chores, still teased his sister back when she annoyed him. To him, life was still simple. The only difference now was that people looked at him differently, not just as a boy, but as proof that even the smallest among us can carry the greatest strength. And yet, beneath the joy and gratitude, fate was quietly preparing another turn. Malik's family was about to face a storm of their own, one that would test their strength and shake their world. But what Malik didn't know then was that the gratitude and love he had earned would soon return to him, and it would come from the very person he had once saved. The weeks after Malik's heroic act felt like a dream for his family. For the first time in a long time, their small home was filled with laughter, warmth, and visitors. Neighbors came by with congratulations, and Malik's name was spoken with pride in schools and community centers. His parents felt lighter, smiling more often as they looked at their son with eyes full of admiration. For once, it seemed as if the struggles of daily life had softened. But life, unpredictable and often harsh, has a way of reminding people that no joy lasts forever without trial. The twist came quietly, almost unnoticed at first. Malik's father, a hard-working man at the factory, returned home one evening with a heavy look on his face. He sat at the table silently while his wife served dinner, his shoulders slumped, his hands rough and tired. Malik noticed right away his father's silence was different tonight. Finally, his father spoke. "They let me go," he said, his voice low and broken. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Malik's mother froze, her spoon slipping from her hand. "What do you mean?" she whispered. "The factory. They're cutting jobs. I was one of the first. No warning, no chance. just like that. His father's eyes dropped to his plate, though he didn't touch the food. The room fell into silence. Malik felt a cold wave wash over him. His father's job had been the lifeline for the family. With his wages, they paid rent, bought food, kept the lights on. Without it, everything seemed uncertain. In the days that followed, the reality of the loss hit hard. Bills piled up on the small wooden table in their living room. Malik overheard his parents' hushed conversations late at night, their voices heavy with worry. "How will we keep the house?" his mother would ask, her voice cracking. His father would respond with frustration and sadness. "I'll find something. I'll work anywhere. But jobs, they're not easy to come by now." Malik, though just a boy, felt the weight of their burden pressing onto his shoulders. He tried to help in little ways, running errands, comforting his sister when she cried about possibly moving, and keeping his own fears locked inside. But inside his heart, he worried deeply. What if they lost everything? What if his family ended up on the streets? The once celebrated hero of the neighborhood now sat quietly on the porch, staring at the road, wondering how everything had changed so fast. Just weeks ago, people had been cheering his name. Now, he felt powerless against the storm crashing into his family's life. And then, like fate, turning a page in a story, a knock came at their door one evening. Malik's mother opened it, and there stood Officer Daniels. She was glowing with health, her belly larger now, her smile gentle but firm. Behind her were two other officers, holding bags in their hands. "I heard," she said softly, stepping inside. Her eyes met Malik's mother's, full of understanding. "About your husband's job? About the bills? I'm so sorry, Alex." Mother tried to wave it off, embarrassed. "We'll manage. We always do." But Officer Daniels shook her head. "No, this time, you don't have to manage alone. You've already given me and my baby the gift of life. Now, it's our turn." She gestured, and the officers behind her set the bags on the table. Inside were groceries, supplies, and envelopes with money collected from the department. Malik's mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. His father, who had been sitting silently in the corner, stood and shook his head in disbelief. "We can't accept this," he said, his pride wrestling with his desperation. But Officer Daniels placed her hand gently on his arm. "You must, because this isn't charity. This is gratitude. If not for your son, I wouldn't be standing here. My child wouldn't be alive. Let us do this for you." Tears filled Malik's mother's eyes, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to cry openly. Not from fear, but from relief. Malik watched as his father, a man who had always carried himself with strength, finally allowed his shoulders to relax, a glimmer of hope softening the lines of his face. In the days that followed, the support grew. The police department organized a fundraiser for Malik's family, sharing his story with the wider community. People from all walks of life donated, wanting to give back to the boy who had given so much. Food arrived at their doorstep, bills were paid, and slowly the crushing weight that had hung over the family began to lift. Malik couldn't believe it. The very act that had begun as a simple decision to help someone had now come full circle. By saving Officer Daniels, he had unknowingly saved his own family too. What once felt like a hopeless twist of fate had turned into a miracle, all because kindness had found its way back home. That night, lying in bed, Malik whispered to himself, "This is what Dad meant. What you give always finds a way to come back." He smiled in the dark, knowing that courage had not only saved a life, it had saved his family. And yet, this was not the end. The bond between Malik and Officer Daniels was still growing, becoming something far deeper than a moment of gratitude. It was becoming a story of family, love, and destiny that would last for a lifetime. The fundraiser organized by the police department spread across the city like wildfire. People who had never even met Malik began to hear the story of the boy who saved an expectant police officer, and how now his own family had fallen into hardship. Newspapers wrote about it, local TV channels broadcasted updates, and social media overflowed with posts carrying Malik's smiling face beside words like hero, bravery, and faith in humanity restored. At first, Malik didn't know how to handle the attention. When neighbors waved at him or strangers stopped him on the street to shake his hand, he would smile shyly and look down at his shoes. He didn't feel like a hero. He still saw himself as the same boy who worried about math tests, teased his sister, and helped his mother with chores. But the truth was, the ripples of his one decision were now circling back to him in a way that felt almost magical. The miracle began quietly. Groceries started arriving at their doorstep almost every other day. Bags filled with rice, bread, vegetables, and fruit would sit on the porch when they opened the door. Sometimes there were notes inside that simply said, "Thank you, Malik. We will never forget what you did." Then came envelopes with money, slipped anonymously into their mailbox. Some were from officers who worked with Daniels, some from mothers who said they could not stop imagining if it had been them lying on that ground, their child's life in the balance. Others came from complete strangers who had simply read the story in the news and wanted to help. Malik's father, once weighed down by shame after losing his job, now found himself standing taller. Though it was difficult for him to accept help, at first he began to realize this was not charity. This was love returning to his family, a love born out of Malik's courage. His mother, too, walked with a lighter heart, her laughter returning to the home after weeks of worry. And Malik's little sister, who had once cried about losing their home, now ran around the house shouting, "We're saved, we're saved." But the most powerful moment came one evening, weeks after the fundraiser began. Malik and his family were invited to a community event held at the local town hall. The room was packed with people, families, officers, neighbors, teachers even. Children holding signs with Malik's name on them. The police chief spoke first, telling the story of Malik's bravery, how he saved Officer Daniels and her unborn child, and how his act of kindness had inspired the city. Then, Officer Daniels walked slowly to the stage, her hand resting gently on her now much larger belly. She looked radiant, her smile glowing as the crowd applauded. When she turned to Malik, her eyes filled with tears. "Because of this boy," she began, her voice trembling, "I stand here today with my child still growing inside me. Because of him, I will live to become a mother. And because of him, I discovered that heroes don't have to be men in uniforms or people with power. Sometimes heroes are young boys with hearts bigger than their fear." The audience grew quiet as she paused, turning toward Malik. But this story did not end the day he saved me. Because when his family fell into hardship, it was his courage that reminded us all to come together. And tonight, I want him and his family to know just how much they mean to us. With that, she held out a large envelope. Inside were the final collections from the fundraiser, enough to cover their rent for months. Enough to buy Malik's father time to find a new job. Enough to keep the lights on and food on the table. The hall erupted in applause, people rising to their feet, clapping and cheering for Malik and his family. Malik's mother covered her face with her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. His father hugged him tightly, whispering, "You've saved us, son. Just as you saved her, you saved us." Malik, overwhelmed by the cheers, by the flashing lights of cameras, and by the weight of the moment, could only smile shyly and clutch the medal that still hung around his neck from weeks before. For him, it wasn't about the money, the gifts, or even the applause. It was about something deeper, the circle of kindness that had formed around them. He had once held a woman's hand to keep her alive, Now an entire city was holding his family's hand to keep them standing. As the evening ended, Officer Daniels pulled Malik aside. She bent down so her eyes met his. One day, she said softly, "My child will grow up. And when they do, I will tell them about you. I will tell them how a young boy with nothing but courage saved their life before they even entered this world. You will always be part of our family, Malik. Always." Malik's heart swelled with emotions he could not put into words. He nodded slowly, understanding that what connected them was not just gratitude, but something much stronger. A bond forged in the fire of fear and saved by the strength of kindness. That night, as Malik lay in bed, he thought about how much had changed. His life was still simple in many ways, but now it carried a deeper meaning. He had learned that sometimes miracles are not sudden flashes of magic. Sometimes miracles are people coming together, kindness returning when it is needed most, and hearts being lifted by the same courage that once saved a life. And for Malik, this miracle return was only the beginning. Months passed since that unforgettable day when Malik had first found Officer Daniels collapsed beside her patrol car. Seasons changed, the leaves turned golden and fell, and Malik himself grew a little taller, a little wiser, carrying with him experiences that most boys his age could never imagine. Life in his home slowly began to stabilize. His father eventually found new work. Not at the factory, but at a small repair shop where his skills and persistence were valued. His mother, relieved of the crushing weight of financial fear, began smiling again, filling the home with the warmth Malik had always known in his younger years. But more than the food on the table and the bills being paid, there was something else, something invisible yet powerful that had changed in their lives. The family no longer felt alone. They knew that when life became difficult, kindness could find its way back. They had learned that courage, once given, never disappears. It circles back in unexpected ways, creating bonds that last a lifetime. And nowhere was this more visible than in Malik's bond with Officer Daniels. She visited often, sometimes with other officers, sometimes just by herself, her hand resting gently on her growing belly. Malik's little sister adored her, often asking to feel the baby kick, giggling when the tiny movement pressed against her palm. Daniels would smile, her eyes softening as she looked at Malik, silently reminding herself that without him, none of these moments would exist. The day finally came when Officer Daniels went into labor. The news spread quickly through the neighborhood, and Malik's family was one of the first to be called. Hours later, Daniels held a baby girl in her arms, healthy, crying, full of life. When she saw Malik standing shyly in the hospital room, she beckoned him over. "Meet your little sister," she whispered, handing the baby gently into his arms. Malik's heart raced as he looked down at the tiny face, so fragile yet so full of promise. The baby's small fingers curled around his, gripping tightly as though recognizing the boy who had once been her silent guardian before she was even born. Tears blurred Malik's vision as Daniels placed a hand on his shoulder. "Her name is Grace," she said softly, "because that's what you gave us that day. Grace, mercy, and life. And she will grow up knowing your name, Malik. She will grow up knowing that her story began with your courage." Malik stood silently, overwhelmed. He had never felt so connected to another life before. In that moment, he understood something profound. Courage doesn't just save lives, it creates new ones. His act that morning in the park had planted a seed that would grow for generations. As Grace grew, the bond between Malik's family and Daniel's family deepened. Birthdays were celebrated together, holidays shared, and their lives intertwined as though they had always been one. Malik became like an older brother to Grace, guiding her as she learned to walk, teaching her little games, and later helping her with schoolwork. To her, he wasn't just a family friend. He was a hero, her protector, the reason she had ever taken her first breath. But the story didn't end there. As Malik grew older, his act of bravery became a source of inspiration. For others, teachers told his story in classrooms, encouraging children to believe in their own strength. Community leaders shared it at events, reminding people that age and size do not determine courage, the heart does. One day, years later, Malik stood in front of a group of younger students at a local school. They had invited him to speak, now as a teenager, about his experience. At first, he was nervous, shuffling his feet as dozens of curious eyes looked up at him. But then, he remembered the words his father had once told him, and he spoke from the heart. "I was scared that day," he admitted honestly. "I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt like a boy who didn't want someone to die." But courage isn't about being fearless. Courage is about choosing to help, even when you're afraid. That's something every one of you can do. The children listened in awe, their eyes wide, some whispering to each other as though they had just heard the most important lesson of their lives. Malik smiled, realizing that his story wasn't just his anymore. It had become a light for others, a reminder that kindness and bravery can come from anyone, anywhere. Back at home, Malik often sat with Grace, now a playful little girl full of energy. She would climb onto his lap and ask him to tell the story. Again, the story of how he had saved her and her mother. Each time he would laugh and say, "You're going to get tired of hearing it one day." But she would shake her head fiercely. "Never. It's my favorite story." And so, the story lived on, not in medals, not in newspaper clippings, not even in the fundraiser that had once saved his family. It lived on in the laughter of a child, in the gratitude of a mother, and in the quiet pride of a boy who had discovered what true courage meant. For Malik, the lesson was clear. One act of bravery can echo far beyond a single moment. It can change lives, build families, and inspire generations. That was his legacy, not just saving a life, but creating a chain of kindness and love that would never be broken. And every time Grace looked up at him with those wide, trusting eyes, Malik knew the truth. Heroes aren't born in stories. They are made in moments. And his moment, that day on an ordinary walk to school, had created a legacy that would live forever.